The sun hung low over the vast western plains, casting long streaks of amber across the desert floor as the evening settled like a warm blanket over the dry earth. Dust rose in thin swirls with every gentle push of the wind, drifting toward the distant mountains where the sky bled into shades of crimson and gold. It was a day like many others, quiet, lonely, echoing with the restless pulse of the frontier, yet the air carried an unusual tension, the kind that whispered the arrival of a story that would be remembered for generations. Far along the winding trail that cut between the sagebrush and sun-baked boulders, a lone rider moved with steady determination. His silhouette was sharp against the horizon, tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, riding a powerful chestnut stallion that stepped with a quiet strength. A cowboy's presence blended into the land as if he had always been part of it. His boots were worn from miles of rugged travel, his hat dusted with the memory of storms and scorching sun, and his jaw marked by the unshaken resolve of a man who lived by the code of the untamed West. His name was Cole Hartwell, though few ever dared to use it. Most simply called him the Iron Rider, a title he earned after surviving more battles, storms, and heartbreaks than any man ought to bear. He was searching for something he never admitted out loud: peace, perhaps, or redemption from shadows that clung to him like the dust of the trail. But on this particular evening, before the sun touched the rim of the earth, he would stumble upon something he never expected, the beginning of a love story powerful enough to shake his world. Its core. Across the distant ridge lay a small settlement known as Ridgewater Station, a place where wanderers came for water, supplies, and brief shelter from the harsh landscape. Cole had planned only a short stopover to rest and replenish before journeying deeper into the unknown valleys to the north. But fate had other intentions, ones already unfolding in quiet secrecy just beyond the edge of town. In a secluded meadow behind the last wooden cabin of Ridgewater lived a woman whose beauty and presence seemed almost too delicate for the rugged frontier. Her name was Evelyn Marlowe, though the locals affectionately called her the Wildflower Widow, an echo of the loss she carried and the resilience she embodied. Evelyn had been alone for nearly 2 years, tending to her small farm with quiet grace. She rarely stepped into town, except to sell her fresh milk and gather essentials, speaking only when necessary. Yet those who caught even a glimpse of her never forgot the sight: the elegant sway of her long, sun gold hair, the softness of her eyes that held both sorrow and silent strength, the gentle confidence in her posture as she moved through life with the steady determination of a woman who had learned to survive. On this very evening, Evelyn worked among her grazing horses, unaware that destiny was shifting in her direction. She wore a simple cotton dress, faded from sun exposure, fluttering lightly around her as she moved along the fenced pasture. Her hands carried the warmth of familiarity with the animals, and the horses responded to her with calm trust. Yet beneath her peaceful routine lay a quiet tension that matched the breeze, an uneasy awareness she could not name. Cole approached the outskirts of Ridgewater just as the sky began its final descent into twilight. His stallion slowed as he neared the meadow, its ears flicking forward at the faint rustle of movement nearby. Cole followed the motion with cautious eyes, instinctively scanning the landscape. That was when he saw her for the first time. Evelyn stood with her back slightly turned, the soft outlines of her silhouette framed by the golden wash of sunset. Her dress clung to her in the breeze, revealing the elegant curves of her figure as she reached to secure a loose strap on her saddle. The moment lasted a single breath, yet in that breath Cole felt something shift, something heavy, something electric, something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Evelyn did not sense his presence immediately. Instead, she continued her quiet work, unaware that a stranger watched her with a growing intensity he could not restrain. Cole tried to look away, but his gaze remained anchored, drawn by a force stronger than his will. There was an unexplainable magnetism in the air, the kind that happens only once in a lifetime, when two paths, long miles apart, unexpectedly collide. Just then, a sudden and sharp gust of wind tore through the meadow. The force of it swept across the dry grass, rattling the fences and startling the horses. Evelyn turned abruptly, startled by the sudden burst of wild air. As she moved, her dress caught on the sharp splinter of a wooden post, pulling the thin fabric with brutal force. The fabric tore open along her side in a swift, unexpected rip. Evelyn gasped, grabbing instinctively at the torn cloth, but the damage was done. The wind continued its merciless tug, exposing more than she intended. Vulnerability washed over her as she tried to gather the loose folds of her dress, her breath quick and unsteady. Cole's body froze, his heart stuttered in his chest, and his hands trembled on the reins as overwhelming desire and shock surged through him. He had witnessed many things in the harsh West: danger, heartbreak, suffering, but nothing had ever struck him as deeply or as immediately as this moment. He felt the pull of instinct and honor collide violently within him. He knew she needed help, yet he feared approaching her in her compromised state. The wind slowed, leaving only the soft whisper of dusk behind. Evelyn, unaware of the cowboy's full presence, stood clutching the fabric, battling both embarrassment and the evening breeze. And Cole, hidden in the lengthening shadows, struggled against the rising tide of emotion that held him frozen in place, unable to move forward, yet unable to look away. The desert air thickened with tension, an unspoken beginning, a dangerous spark, a moment that would change both their lives forever. And just as the first stars began to appear above the horizon, the story of Cole Hartwell and Evelyn Marlowe quietly awakened, fragile, intense, and destined for the chaos of love in the untamed West. For the night, the wind chose their fate. The wind that had torn Evelyn's dress finally quieted, settling into a soft evening hush as the last colors of sunset dissolved into the darkening sky. The meadow, moments ago alive with motion, now stood still under a blanket of deepening twilight. Only the rhythmic shifting of the horses and the faint rasp of crickets broke the silence. Evelyn clutched the torn fabric against her side, feeling the uneven edge of the rip against her fingertips as she struggled to steady her breath. The raw vulnerability of the moment lingered around her like the ghost of the wind that caused it. Cole remained motionless in the shadows, hidden behind the cover of an old oak stump near the trail. His stallion exhaled sharply, impatient with his rider's sudden stillness, but Cole did not so much as twitch. His heart thudded with heavy, thunderous beats that seemed to echo in his ears. He had encountered danger without flinching, stood face to face with outlaws, and survived storms that would break the spirit of lesser men, but nothing had shaken him the way this moment had. He watched Evelyn with a mixture of concern, admiration, and an aching desire that he could neither resist nor fully understand. Her silhouette, wet in the dim evening light, drew his gaze with magnetic force. She stood in the field with one arm wrapped around herself, her long hair blowing softly over her shoulder, the torn dress clinging precariously to her frame. There was an air of fragile beauty in her posture, yet beneath it a silent strength radiated, as if she were no stranger to discomfort or unexpected hardship. For a brief moment, Cole debated approaching her. It would be the honorable thing to do, to offer a coat or assistance, to show kindness in the face of her distress. But the risk of startling her, of appearing at the worst possible moment, rooted him to the earth. The frontier had rules, unspoken, harsh, and deeply understood by those who lived its unforgiving miles. A woman alone at dusk deserved safety, not fear, and he feared that stepping forward now might create more panic than relief. So he stayed hidden, wrestling with the weight of inaction. Unaware of her silent observer, Evelyn made her way toward the small barn at the far end of her property. The path between the fence and the barn was lined with uneven grass that brushed against her legs as she moved. Each step was careful, measured, her free hand gripping the fabric tightly as she fought to maintain her composure. Her horses trailed behind her with gentle curiosity, sensing her unease in the fading light. Inside the barn, she found an old canvas blanket draped over the wooden crate. She wrapped it around herself with trembling fingers, securing it around her shoulders. The scratchy material was rough, but it offered modesty and warmth. She leaned for a moment against the wall, her breath slow and uneven as she replayed the moment in her mind. The sudden gust of wind, the harsh rip of fabric, the helplessness she felt as the dress tore open. Outside, Cole finally exhaled the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He loosened his grip on the reins, running a hand through his hair, trying to calm the storm within him. The desire that had flashed through him moments ago still smoldered in his chest, but now it mingled with worry. He had no intention of leaving Ridgewater without learning more about the woman he had just seen, the Wildflower Widow, whose name he had heard whispered by traders and travelers. But the night was growing darker, and danger always lurked in shadowed corners of the West. Reluctantly, he guided his stallion toward town, choosing a path that kept him hidden from Evelyn's sight. He would return in daylight, he told himself. He would find a way to approach her respectfully, without causing alarm. Fate had brought him this far. It could surely carry him one step more. Ridgewater Station sat quiet at night, the glow of lanterns flickering through the dusty windows of the saloon and the small general store. Cole rode past them, choosing instead a secluded spot behind the aging blacksmith's shed. He tethered his horse, sat on an overturned water barrel, and let the weight of the day settle onto his broad shoulders. He could still see her in his mind, the curve of her posture, the fear in her eyes, the way her fingers gathered the torn fabric in desperation. It was not just desire that burned in him now. It was something deeper, something unfamiliar, something he wasn't ready to name. Back at her homestead, Evelyn sat alone on her porch after securing the barn doors. The stars above glimmered like silver dust scattered across a dark canvas. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, staring out across the quiet meadow. That sensation, like someone's eyes had been on her, kept returning to her thoughts. It wasn't fear she felt, but a strange awareness she couldn't explain, as if the night itself had been watching, as if the wind had revealed more than just the tear in her dress. She tried to dismiss it as unease from the incident, but the deeper she breathed, the stronger the intuition grew. Something, or someone, had been out there. Hours passed, and both the cowboy and the widow found sleep slow to arrive. Cole leaned back against the shed wall, staring up at the sky, wrestling with the persistent pull that drew his thoughts back to her. Evelyn remained on her porch until the cold forced her inside, her mind circling the same silent mystery. The West had a way of weaving destinies with invisible threads, drawing strangers together through storm, wind, or chance. Tonight those threads had tightened, and though neither of them knew it yet, the simple tear of a dress would be only the beginning. The desire it sparked would carve a path neither could escape. As dawn prepared to rise beyond the mountains, both Cole and Evelyn felt the shift of something new awakening within the frontier. Something powerful, fragile, and dangerously consuming. And with the first pale streak of morning light, their lives in Ridgewater were about to collide again, this time with no shadows between them. When sunrise revealed What night had concealed the first breath of dawn rolled over Ridgewater Station like a quiet promise, painting the land in hues of pale gold and soft rose. The night's chill retreated slowly as sunlight stretched over the distant mountains and settled across the dew-touched grass. A hush lingered in the air, as though the frontier itself waited for something unspoken to unfold. Cole Hartwell rose before the sun fully claimed the sky. He brushed the dust from his coat, tightened the saddle straps on his stallion, and paused for a moment, allowing the early morning stillness to wash over him. The memory of the previous evening, Evelyn's torn dress, her startled posture, the quiet vulnerability of her silhouette beneath the fading light, had kept him restless through the long night. He felt the weight of the moment still clinging to him, shaping his thoughts with a force he could neither escape nor explain. Yet at sunrise, a different clarity settled over him. The desire that had shaken him in the shadows was now tempered by resolve. The woman he had seen was no passing stranger, no fleeting distraction of the trail. She was someone he needed to understand, someone fate had deliberately placed on his path. The quiet hum of intuition urged him forward, guiding him toward the meadow where she lived. He mounted his stallion and began the slow ride through the waking town. Ridgewater was peaceful in the morning, windows opening, lanterns flickering out, the scent of fresh bread drifting from the small bakery. Farmers prepared their tools, ranch hands whistled to their horses, and the general store owner swept dust from the porch. None of them noticed the cowboy moving with deliberate intention, his gaze fixed on the distant ridge where Evelyn Marlowe's homestead stood silhouetted against the rising sun. Evelyn, too, felt the dawn differently than most mornings. She had slept lightly, waking with the unsettled feeling that someone had been near her the night before. She stood at the edge of her porch, wrapped in a soft shawl, watching her horses graze quietly in the open field. The torn dress hung on a hook beside her door, the rip still raw and uneven. Its sight brought a fresh wave of discomfort, not just because of the embarrassment it caused, but because of the inexplicable sense that the moment had been witnessed. She tried to dismiss the thought, but something inside her held on. There had been an energy in the air, a presence she could not name. It lingered even now, as if the memory of unseen eyes still drifted on the breeze. Evelyn gathered a small laundry basket, intending to mend the torn garment before noon. Her hands moved carefully, but her thoughts refused to settle. The meadow felt different this morning, alive, expectant, aware. As Cole approached the ridge, he slowed his horse and paused at the top of the hill overlooking her land. The sight before him was serene. Evelyn stood beside her porch, brushing her hair back as she prepared for the day's tasks. Her posture was graceful, her movements gentle yet purposeful. There was strength in the way she carried herself, a quiet resilience shaped by hardship and survival. Cole felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the same sensation that had seized him the night before. But now, without the shadows of dusk and the shock of vulnerability, the feeling ran deeper, more grounded. He was drawn to her, not by impulse alone, but by something elemental and dangerous. He could not remember the last time he had felt such a pull toward another soul. He rode slowly down the ridge, determined not to startle her. The rhythmic clop of his horse's hooves broke the morning silence, and Evelyn turned, startled by the sudden sound. Her gaze traveled instinctively toward the unfamiliar rider, approaching her property. A flicker of tension passed across her face. She had seen many travelers, many strangers, but something about this man held a gravity that unsettled her. Cole guided his stallion to a careful stop a short distance from her porch. He remained mounted, allowing her space, respecting the boundaries of her land. He removed his hat in a gesture of courtesy. Evelyn studied him with cautious curiosity, noting the worn edges of his coat, the disciplined way he held himself, the steadiness of his gaze. Something about him felt familiar, though she couldn't place why. Cole's intention was simple: to offer assistance, to introduce himself, to forge the beginning of a connection he could not deny. But the torn dress, hanging beside her door, caught his eye once more. Its rip was unmistakably the same one he had witnessed the night before, and memory surged through him with sharp clarity. Evelyn noticed his gaze shift, and a faint, embarrassed heat crawled into her chest. She instinctively moved toward the garment, lifting it from the hook, as though hiding its existence could erase the moment entirely. Cole looked away respectfully, but the silent understanding between them had already formed, an unspoken thread connecting the vulnerability she carried with the witness he had unwillingly been. Evelyn carried the dress inside, closing the door softly behind her. She leaned against the wooden frame, her heart quickening with a feeling she couldn't name. Something about the cowboy outside stirred unease and curiosity in equal measure. She sensed he was not merely passing through. Something in his presence hinted at a deeper purpose, a reason for being drawn to her land at dawn. Cole dismounted, choosing to wait. His instincts told him not to leave, not now. He felt the shift of fate more strongly than ever. The quiet peace of the meadow held a thick, electric tension, a sense that this place, this moment, mattered in a way he could not yet define. Minutes passed, and when Evelyn returned to the porch, she carried herself with a calm resolve. She stepped into the sunlight, meeting the cowboy's steady gaze. The air between them felt charged, as though sunrise had peeled back a layer of silence that neither could hide behind any more. The West was known for its unpredictability, for storms without warning, for danger without mercy, for fate without fairness. But the most unpredictable force of all was unfolding now in the quiet space between these two strangers. And as the morning deepened into full daylight, the first real connection between Cole Hartwell and Evelyn Marlowe took root, subtle, fragile, yet powerful enough to reshape the days ahead. For the frontier had no intention of letting their paths drift apart now that they had finally crossed. Ter 6. A storm in the quiet valley morning settled into midday across Ridgewater with a calmness that belied the gathering tension within the hearts of both Evelyn Marlowe and Cole Hartwell. The sun rose high above the meadow, spilling warm light across the horses grazing near the fence line. Yet beneath the peaceful scene, something deeper pulsed like a hidden current, an invisible force drawing the cowboy and the widow ever closer. After Evelyn stepped back onto the porch, the air between them had felt unexpectedly fragile, charged with an energy neither understood nor dared to confront fully. Cole stood near the edge of her property with a quiet patience that seemed carved from stone. He did not intrude, did not speak, did not force a moment. He simply existed there, steady, calm, watchful, yet undeniably drawn toward her. Evelyn had felt the weight of his presence even after returning inside. She moved about her kitchen with restless hands, attempting to distract herself with sweeping, cleaning, folding. But every few minutes, her gaze drifted back toward the window, toward the lone figure waiting beneath the open sky. Something about him unsettled the careful balance of her life, stirring emotions long dormant. It wasn't fear. It wasn't discomfort. It was something far more dangerous: connection. The wind picked up again, not with the harshness of the night before, but with a restless whisper that curled through the meadow, as if carrying the memory of yesterday's torn dress. Evelyn shivered at the thought, still uncertain whether the moment had been witnessed. She wished to believe no one had seen her vulnerability under the fading sunset. And yet a strange intuition gnawed at her, a sense that the cowboy before her may have been closer that evening than she realized. Cole, too, felt the lingering memory press against him as he watched her silhouette move behind the window's glass. The image from the previous night, her startled gasp as the wind tore the fabric, the soft curve of her figure outlined in the fading light, still clung to him like a brand. Not in a way of desire alone, though that had struck him with undeniable force, but in a deeper way that unsettled the hardened edges of his heart. He had seen vulnerability in the frontier many times: wounds, fear, hunger, desperation. But what he had seen in Evelyn was something different, a moment of raw fragility wrapped in grace. A moment that called to him in ways he did not expect, awakening instincts he hadn't let surface in years. After a long stretch of stillness, Evelyn finally stepped back outside, holding a basket of feed for the horses. Her movements were practiced, gentle, and precise as she walked toward the fence line. Cole remained near the ridge, careful to offer her space, yet unable to look away from the quiet beauty of her presence. She placed the basket down and let the horses gather around, their soft wings carried lightly across the air. Cole studied her with growing respect. She moved with a confidence born from years of managing the land alone. She was not fragile, despite the moment the wind had stolen from her. She was strong, capable, resilient. But even the strongest hearts harbored cracks. A sudden shift in the wind caught her shawl and lifted it slightly. She pressed it close, steadying her breath as she continued feeding the horses. Cole noticed the subtle gesture, sensing the lingering embarrassment she carried. His chest tightened with the urge to reassure her, to ease the burden of uncertainty, but he knew stepping forward too soon might shatter the gentleness of the moment. The sky above began to darken lightly, clouds forming over the distant ridge. A faint rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, a reminder that even peaceful days in the west could turn volatile without warning. Evelyn glanced upward, studying the horizon with concern. Storms in Ridgewater could be sudden, violent, and unforgiving. She dropped the empty basket and began to gather the horses, guiding them toward the barn before the weather turned. Her movements quickened with purpose, her braid bouncing against her back as she secured the gate. Cole sensed the shift instantly. His instincts sharpened, pushing him toward the meadow. He mounted his stallion and trotted down the slope, approaching her with measured caution. The wind grew stronger, sending dust spiraling across the field, carrying with it the scent of impending rain. He arrived near her gate just as she struggled to latch it. The tension in the air thickened, part storm, part unspoken connection. Evelyn felt him before she fully saw him, the weight of his presence settling around her like a second atmosphere. She stepped back from the gate, her breath uneven, her shawl whipping behind her. Cole dismounted carefully, the ground vibrating beneath them as distant thunder rolled closer. The storm clouds gathered fast, casting shadows across the meadow. In that moment, Evelyn realized something. She wasn't afraid of the storm. She wasn't afraid of the cowboy either. What she feared, what she didn't dare admit, was the force pulling them closer, tugging at the quiet spaces in her heart. Cole reached the fence and steadied the wooden latch, securing it with practiced strength. His movements were steady, quiet, respectful. He didn't cross the boundary. He merely helped where help was needed. Yet that small act resonated louder than any words could have. The wind continued to build, carrying the scent of rain and electricity. Evelyn held the shawl tight around herself, her eyes meeting his for a long moment. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgment of fate's quiet weaving, of the moment they were both stepping into without knowing where it would lead. Thunder cracked sharply above them. The horses inside the barn whinnied restlessly. Cole stepped back from the gate, giving her space as the first droplets of rain began to fall. The storm was moments away. The meadow darkened, the air trembled, and the fragile threads binding them began to tighten with an intensity neither could ignore. For the storm that approached Ridgewater was more than thunder and rain. It was the storm that would push their paths dangerously close, pulling their hearts into a reckoning neither was prepared to face. When the storm forced them close, the sky over Ridgewater broke open with a force that seemed to shake the very bones of the valley. Rain poured down heavily, drumming against the earth, swallowing the landscape in a curtain of silver. Lightning sliced through the clouds, illuminating the meadow in sharp flashes, and thunder cracked across the sky like the voice of an angry giant. The peace of the day was gone, replaced by chaos, wind, and the rising heartbeat of fate. Evelyn hurried across the open yard, her shawl soaked and clinging to her shoulders as she struggled to reach the barn doors. The horses inside kicked anxiously at the walls, frightened by the sudden violence of the storm. She pushed against the wind, her breath shallow, her hair whipping against her face. The storm was relentless, its gusts tearing at her clothing, pulling at the very ground beneath her feet. Cole stood only a few yards away, having lingered longer than he had intended when the rain began. He watched her fight against the storm with fierce determination, her silhouette barely visible in the swirling darkness. Instinct surged through him, the kind of instinct that had kept him alive in countless unpredictable moments across the frontier. He knew the storm could turn perilous within seconds, and he knew Evelyn could not battle it alone. As the wind roared louder, Evelyn reached the barn and pulled the heavy doors shut with all the strength she could summon. But the storm struck again, and the latch slipped from her grasp. The door swung wide, slamming into her with enough force to knock her off balance. She stumbled back, her shawl caught in the corner of the wood, pulling her sideways. Cole moved immediately, pushing through the wind and rain with a strength carved from years of survival. The storm battered against him, soaking through his coat and stinging his eyes, but he pressed forward until he reached her. Evelyn, struggling to free the shawl from the barn door, felt the storm's pull growing stronger. Her feet slipped in the mud as she fought to regain her balance. The wind caught her shawl again, ripping it free and tossing it into the storm. The sudden force left her exposed to the biting cold, her soaked dress clinging tightly to her form. She gasped, gripping the edge of the barn door as another gust threatened to pull her away. Panic flickered through her chest, not from fear of the storm, but from the helplessness of the moment. Cole reached her just as lightning illuminated the meadow, revealing her vulnerable silhouette against the raging wind. His heart surged with a fierce mixture of protectiveness and emotion, the sight striking him as powerfully as the storm itself. He steadied her with one firm gesture, anchoring her against the tempest that threatened to drag her into its fury. Their bodies were only inches apart, the storm swirling violently around them. Rain drenched their faces, their clothing, their hair. Evelyn could feel the strength of his presence, the silent steadiness of a man who had endured more storms both of nature and of life than most could fathom. Cole sensed the tremble in her posture, not of fear, but of exhaustion and cold. He reached around her to secure the barn door, his hands gripping the heavy wood with practiced force. The latch clamped shut under the pressure of his strength, sealing the horses safely inside. The wind howled in frustration, unable to pry the door open now that it had met the will of a determined cowboy. Evelyn leaned against the wall of the barn, her breath shuddering as she fought to compose herself. The storm continued to rage, but the danger of the moment had passed. Her dress, soaked through, clung to her like a second skin, its delicate fabric outlining the shape of her body with an intimacy she had not intended. She held her arms tightly around herself, trying to shield her trembling frame from the cold. Cole stood only a step away, the rain dripping from the brim of his hat, his breath visible in the chilled air. The storm had trapped them together alone in the fierce wilderness, caught between thunder and silence. He felt the ache of unspoken emotion pressing against his chest, heavier than the weight of the storm above them. He watched her with a quiet intensity, the memory of the torn dress from the night before echoing through his mind. But this moment was different, sharper, deeper, shaped by fear, vulnerability, and the undeniable pull that had grown between them since the first spark of dusk. The rain softened only slightly, falling now in heavy sheets instead of violent lashes. Evelyn steadied herself, brushing wet hair from her face as she stood beneath the shelter of the barn's overhang. Her soaked dress revealed far more than she wished, and the awareness of the cowboy's nearness tightened the breath in her lungs. She felt exposed not just physically, but emotionally, as though the storm had stripped away the layers she had carefully built around her heart. Cole turned his gaze away, giving her a moment of privacy even in the closeness of the storm. It was an act of respect that only deepened her confusion. She had expected a stranger, a wanderer, a man with no ties to her world. But what she saw instead was someone who carried restraint like a badge of honor, someone who had felt desire but refused to act without dignity. Still, the tension of the moment clung to the air like the humidity before lightning strikes. The storm outside began to ease, its rage diminishing, but the storm between them brewed stronger than ever. Evelyn stepped back toward the barn, seeking shelter from the lingering rain. Cole remained at the edge of the overhang, allowing her space even as the distance between them felt unbearably charged. The sound of rain on the roof echoed around them, filling the silence with a rhythmic heartbeat. The sky rumbled once more, softer now, like a warning rather than a threat. The storm had not finished with Ridgewater, and neither had fate finished with them, for in the heart of the storm, something unspoken had solidified, something neither of them could ignore any more. Their paths were intertwined now, bound by chance, by wind, and by the slow, steady pull of emotions too powerful to deny. And as the rain continued to fall, the frontier prepared to reveal the truth neither of them expected in the final chapter of their story. Where fate finally chose their hearts, the storm lingered through the night, softening only when dawn approached and the first pale streaks of morning touched the soaked earth. The meadow glistened beneath rising sunlight, each blade of grass jeweled with droplets, each footprint softened by the night's violent rain. The air held the scent of wet soil and distant pine, carrying with it the aftermath of both fury and cleansing. Inside the barn's quiet shelter, warmth still clung to the place where Evelyn and Cole had weathered the storm. They had not spoken, had not exchanged a single word, yet the unspoken connection between them was stronger than anything a conversation could ever build. Their nearness throughout the long night, the shared tension in the close shadows, and the vulnerability each had witnessed in the other, had woven an invisible bond neither would forget. Evelyn stood near the barn's entrance, watching the rain taper off into a mist that curled gently across the valley. Her dress, though dried somewhat by the barn's shelter, still held the memory of the storm, wrinkled fabric, faint mud along her hem, and the lingering chill against her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, not out of fear, but in a silent effort to anchor the emotions stirring through her. Cole stood a few feet away, leaning against one of the wooden support beams, his hat resting in his hands. The storm had left its mark on him as well. His coat hung heavy with dampness, his hair mussed from the long hours of rainfall, and his eyes carried a depth rarely exposed to another soul. He watched Evelyn quietly, studying the way morning light softened her features, how the exhaustion of the night before shaped her expression into something delicate yet profoundly strong. There was no need for speech, not after everything the storm had forced them to share. The silence between them felt natural, not empty. It carried weight, meaning, and an unspoken question neither dared to voice. Evelyn moved slowly into the open air, stepping out from under the shelter of the barn's overhang. The sun warmed her skin as she inhaled deeply, letting the fresh scent of rain fill her chest. She felt the world shift around her, the land washed clean, the horses calming inside the barn, and an unfamiliar stillness lingering inside her heart. It was the kind of stillness that followed change, the kind that preceded new beginnings. Cole followed her with measured steps, stopping beside her, but keeping a respectful distance. His gaze drifted across the meadow, scanning the landscape with the instincts of a man who had traveled through countless untamed places. But this place, her land, felt different. It felt rooted, safe, more like a home than anywhere he had stopped before. A quiet understanding settled between them. They had crossed a threshold without intending to, drawn together by chance, by wind, by the unexplainable forces that guided hearts long before words were ever spoken. The torn dress, the shock on Evelyn's face, the trembling in Cole's hands, the storm's chaos each moment had carved their paths deeper into one another's lives. Evelyn bent to gather her scattered tools near the fence line. Her movements were slower today, tempered by the heaviness of an emotional realization settling gently around her. She had lived alone for so long, had fought through her days with steady hands and a quiet heart. But the storm had revealed something she had not expected, a longing she had buried so deeply she forgot it existed. Cole moved to help, kneeling to lift the heavy bucket she struggled with. He did so quietly, careful not to overstep her boundaries. She glanced toward him, and their eyes met once more, two souls standing at the edge of something neither fully understood, but both felt with undeniable clarity. There was no fear in her gaze now, no uncertainty, only recognition. Cole felt the shift as surely as he felt the morning breeze. He had wandered across the frontier seeking purpose, seeking peace, carrying scars no one ever saw. But somehow, in the torn fabric of a stranger's dress, in the trembling vulnerability of dusk, in the fierce storm that forced their closeness, he had found something he didn't know he had been missing. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last remnants of the storm. Warmth replaced the night's chill, and the meadow began to glow with renewed life. Birds returned to the fence posts, chirping softly. The horses stepped carefully out of the barn, their hooves sinking into softened soil. Life resumed around them, but something between Cole and Evelyn remained suspended in a fragile, beautiful uncertainty. Cole walked toward the gate, pausing as his gaze lingered over the land, over the barn, over Evelyn. He felt the weight of a choice resting on his shoulders, a choice between continuing his endless wandering or anchoring himself to a place that finally felt like belonging. Evelyn sensed the deliberation within him. She watched as he placed his hat back on his head, as he adjusted the saddle straps on his stallion, as he took one long breath of the morning air. For a moment she wondered whether he would ride away, leaving the storm's intimacy behind as a fleeting memory. The thought tugged at her chest in a way she had not expected. But Cole didn't mount the stallion, not yet. He turned, looking at her with a depth that spoke louder than any words, a depth that said he wasn't ready to leave, a depth that said the storm had awakened something in him that could not be abandoned at the edge of dawn. Evelyn stepped toward him, drawn by the same unfamiliar pull that had been building since the moment her dress tore open beneath the dying sun. Their closeness now was quiet, controlled, and strangely peaceful. No storm, no chaos, only the lingering warmth of a bond carved by fate. The wind shifted softly, brushing her hair across her cheek. Cole felt a subtle ache rise in his chest, the same trembling restraint he had felt that first night. Yet he stood firm, honoring the quiet moment with the patience and respect she deserved. The meadow around them felt timeless, sacred, a place where two lives had collided unexpectedly and beautifully, shaped by a torn dress, a trembling heart, and a storm that refused to let them walk separate paths. Whatever the future held, whether they chose the road together or parted ways, their story had already been written in the language of the untamed West, a story of longing, fate, and the powerful pull of two souls discovering connection in a world shaped by loss and survival. And as the morning sun broke fully over Ridgewater, both Evelyn Marlowe and Cole Hartwell understood one truth: their paths would never again be the same.